And I think the idea is that our 5 panelists sit along here. So sorry again to disturb your lunch, but could we possibly ask Alexandra, up here somewhere. We're going to temporarily blind you with slides at some point, but we'll warn you. No, there's no order. Whatever you feel like doing. I'll sit near the slides. Okay, so my name is Susanna Jenkins. I'm just here to moderate and try and start up discussions. And we have our important panelists here, really happy. This is an event that was organised by the Early Career Research. This is their first event that they had as a working group. So we have lots of people who aren't Early Career Research, and we have some group here. But we're kind of having a focus. There will be lots of discussion around other items, but we'll like to talk about how you can communicate science during unrest and peacetime, actually, for eruption crises, especially with a focus on early career researchers. So I'm going to quickly introduce the panel very briefly. Sorry for whoever that's blinding, so people. We have 5 panelists. We're going to ask you to introduce yourselves in a second. And we're talking about scientific communication. I have a lovely photo of Cotopaxi, so that everyone's not left out by the blender, and also a call to Mount St. Helens. And these are some of the crises that the people on the panel have covered. So what I would like to do now, we will be inviting questions from the audience as we go. But just to start, if everyone on the panel could give a quick introduction of who you are, what your role is, how long you've been in that position, and maybe just a little what your key points for communication might be just for now, and briefly, so a minute or so if possible, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Patty Moffas, and I have worked at the Geophysical Institute in Quito, Ecuador since the late 80s. I've worked on a lot of volcanoes and have been through at least 6 volcano crises, dealing with at least 4, more than 5 or 6 main eruptive periods, but also periods of unrest. I was the head of volcanology for 6 years, and now I'm a senior investigator and doing a lot of monitoring as well as research. So, I'm supposed to say something about my viewpoints?
Yeah, just a little take-home message or a...
Okay, I think that it's really important that people who are speaking during a volcano crisis are people that can kind of emit a feeling of great knowledge, that they are involved in the monitoring, or they know something deep about the volcano as well, that they know the local geography, geology if possible, and also the people with whom they are communicating. Because there are often not only urban environments, obviously, but there are rural environments. There's people who make different kinds of livings, they use the land differently, and all those have to be addressed, I think. And I really, truly believe that it's important to emit trust. People want to trust you, because a lot of what you say, they may make decisions upon it. They make good or bad decisions. And I'm stuck, or I've had people say to me, well, should I have my baby here, or should I go to the other town? I mean, I've had all kinds of things addressed to me. So you want to feel that they want to trust you, and you want to put out the best advice possible. They also want to know, how do you think where the volcano is going, not so much about what it's done in the past. They don't necessarily want to know your PhD dissertation. They want to know, based on all the monitoring data, where do you think the volcano is going, and maybe that means that it's going to be quiet for a long time, or perhaps you think, based on all the forecasting, that it could have an eruption in a very short period of time.
Thanks, Patty. Hi, my name is Carolyn Dreger. I'm a hydrologist and outreach coordinator at the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory. I've been working there since 1990 and as outreach coordinator since 1995. Was at the 1980 eruption and saw the need for improved science communication at that time, and again in the 2004 to 2008 eruption. I guess the 2 important points I'd like to make are, first, that you must have good communication with the people you'll be working with, officials and such, and the public, before the crisis begins, long before the crisis begins. And the second point is that during and after a crisis, when all is said and done, whether you and your agency, your scientists, are considered heroes or villains will depend upon the quality of communication that occurred during that crisis.
Thanks, Carolyn. My name is Peter Frenzen. I'm the monument scientist, the staff scientist for the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument, which is on the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. I guess I represent the land managing agencies, and I would say the most important thing to realize is that the land management agency is responsible, the people that are managing the public lands around the volcano, and they have a high degree of interest and stakes in what happens. So they're a primary audience. And then as the incident gets larger and as the threat moves to adjacent private lands, you bring in the local governments and especially the elected officials like the county sheriffs on federal lands that are managed by the Forest Service. And they also have a huge stake in the decisions that have to be made to keep the people around the volcano safe. And then, of course, as Carolyn said, you also have a huge media thing that's spooling up and demands to be served. But so those three things need to be taken care of actively, and they're all important constituencies.
Okay. My name is Cassandra Profita. I'm a reporter at Oregon Public Broadcasting. I've been reporting on science and the environment for about 10 years now, and I've never covered a volcanic eruption. But I can tell you that, in general, journalists take their responsibility to inform the public very seriously, and that means that in a crisis, we're going to be thinking about what kinds of questions the public is asking and doing everything we can to find the answers to those questions. So we need to know the science well enough to explain it to people in a way that everyone will understand. So we'll be looking for people who can help us simplify complicated ideas, put them in context, tell us, how bad is this? What kinds of impacts are you concerned about? And ultimately help us access the human side of the story, whether that's the human reactions of scientists involved or the human impacts.
Hi, my name is Freystein Sigmundsson. I'm at the University of Iceland. I'm a geophysicist, background in volcano geodesy. I've been in Iceland since '92. I've responded to 8 eruptions, many unrest periods. We have a very good civil protection group in Iceland that we interact very actively with. So I'm from the university. We have also here in the room, I see Sarah Barsotti from the Icelandic Met Office that has the official responsibility for monitoring, but we collaborate together. I think there is a very important point, sort of, some of it is common sense. Of course, you need to know what you're talking about, and that is really, really important. I think the media often wants what is the message, what is the simple message, and how can you say it in 10 seconds or 1 minute max. That is what the media is often after. In Iceland, it has been really important to have meetings of a science committee for the civil protection, basically trying to bring all the data at the table for evaluation of unrest. And there's often a problem, there can be a gap between monitoring institutions and universities. If you're at a university, it depends on how your university sees it, but you have the academic freedom, you should be able to inform about everything you know and the manner you know, but if you're at a monitoring agency, there may be more of a sort of one message that comes from the monitoring institution, and there's the goals of how to balance that. And in Iceland, I think it has been very beneficial to bring all the scientists together in a at a science committee meeting. discuss events before, discuss with your colleagues before discussing, presenting to the media. On the other hand, it was mentioned here, the trust. I think that's really important. It builds up over a long time, and it's very easy to break over a short situation. The trust means that, as I see it, that I'm always ready to answer to a reporter if there comes a question. I answer and try to be honest, not hiding anything, and that is really important.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. So as you can see here, we're trying to bring together academics and also those working in the government, civil protection, and the press, and dealing with the public. We kind of got together and thought of a few themes we'd like to discuss. We're going to start with experiences that people have had. The whole point here is that we can learn from these people who have amazing experiences. Has anybody got a burning question that they would like to ask someone or all of the people on the panel about their experience? Otherwise, I have one, which I really want to know, so I'm kind of happy that you don't. I want to hear the stories of where the communication went badly, and then where it went well, and if you learned from one to lead into the other. And I'm going to start with Patty, because you've done some recent crises. If you have any that went badly, maybe you don't.
There was an incident on Cotopaxi in that it had an eruption on the 15th of August 2 years ago. And there was very poor visibility of the volcano, but there wasn't any tremor or evidence in the seismic activity that it was going to produce a lahar. I mean, that a pyroclastic flow was going down from the center of the volcano. There was the ash, which was going up at the most 100 meters and then be dropping down, and that was observed through the clouds. So the people heard that through either the radio or some means that there was a possibility, if there was a pyroclastic flow come down, that it could be a lahar. And it was already been discussed for weeks and weeks or months in advance. Again, we've had contact with many of the people and all the actors that there could be lahars. It was a high probability. But just the mere sound of lahar has great implications in the minds of people, and they fear for it greatly, because in the periods in the time when their families lived in this area, they were wiped out by lahars. So you have to phrase words just with tremendous caution. And we also had a clamping down by the government, in that there was one particular agency that wanted to be the communicator of all information. And so there was not a fluidity of where we could use these learning opportunities, I say learning opportunities, to teach the population what is the difference between a secondary lahar and a primary lahar. A secondary lahar, as we all know, may have very short, it may only come out for maybe 3 to 10 kilometers, where in this particular volcano nobody lives. A primary lahar could have tens of thousands of cubic meters a second and discharge and go maybe 20 to 30 kilometers or much further. So that was all then very difficult also to communicate in a timely basis. Because when you're in a situation where the government at that time was controlling the information, it could only then be done if you had a date or a time that you're going to make this communication. You just couldn't have a press calling the press and say, this is the situation now. So because we were hamstrung by that, we could not get the information out. And the town of Latacunga, which is a town of about 85,000 people, I guess maybe 20,000 evacuated, self-evacuated. And it was chaos. But it was because of very bad information and not being able to then immediately say, this is not the case. If we had immediately said, this is not the case, on our own, we may have been shut down. That's the problem with dealing with kind of totalitarian government in the case, which is not now, but then. And so we were having to run a crisis in a time where we did not have the fluidity or the possibility of being fluid in our information. Of course, then all this was, corrected afterwards. But that was not the ideal situation, and it went badly.
One time that I'll mention two times when communication went bad, but one was not during an actual crisis. It was not during a time of eruption, but when it was at Mount Rainier in 2001 when we had a relatively small debris flow. This speaks to the necessity of having precise terminology, using precise terminology. It speaks to understanding the ownership of the volcano, that just because we are scientists who have spent a lot of time working on a volcano, working with volcanic processes, we often name these processes. It doesn't mean that we own them. It's the local people, the local officials, the people at risk who have ownership of that terminology. Okay, so to make a long story short, we had a seasonal debris flow, something that happens every year. We were still using the word lahar for all events because it was happening on a volcano. We had trained the news media to use the word lahar, and so people immediately thought of the worst possible scenario. People on all sides of the volcano began evacuations to high ground. And we had officials knocking on doors, trying to move people out of valleys. The news media, there were many new people there at the time, the Seattle news media. They didn't know the geography, and things were completely screwed up. And to make a long story short, one official ended up losing a job because of it. So we actually sat down with the news media and with officials, and we had a long conversation with them about how we will use the word debris flows from now on for small events, and the word lahar that will stay inside the park boundaries, the word lahar for anything that is large, that will affect large communities. The second event was started out bad but ended up well, was with the 2004 reawakening of Mount St. Helens, when we had a lot of the news media coming to CBO with a lot of interest. But it went out of control very quickly. We went from having maybe one media call a week to about 80 a day, which were very difficult. It was very difficult to deal with. And we had lines snaking in and out of our doors. We lost the security, the ability to secure our building. Not only that, but people were beginning to wander hallways and find our scientists. But due to the several things, we mitigated that very quickly. We had to make sure that scientists would not answer anybody who called. They would send everyone to all media to one person. And then in the meantime, we also had a joint information center forming in the Forest Service building along with Peter and others. And so we were able to move all of the news media away from CBO, allowing scientists to do their work, and for the news media to get better service and one-stop shopping for their information. So I think we answered about 2,000 media calls over that event.
Just to pick up where Carolyn left off, so the thing in 2000, the eruption in 2004 happened very, very quickly. So we had, essentially went from a quiet volcano to magma piercing the crater floor in 2 weeks. So a key message I'd like to make is that your relationship with the entity that runs the park or the monument where the volcano is key, and preparation and advanced preparation and training is really, and the training that our employees received from CBO, from the USGS, was key to carrying us through that period, because it was almost 2 weeks before an incident management team arrived to assist. So the things that were going on at CBO, we couldn't keep our remote phones charged because and we couldn't make an outgoing call because media from all over the world were calling effectively the park, the monument, and we were knee-deep in satellite trucks. So the training that we had from working closely with the geologists in preparation saw us through that period. So you need to kind of invest in your local volcano and the people that run it, and that will really pay off, not only for them, but for the relationship that we have and carried us all through that event.
Just before we go on, because we want it to be interactive, there was a question, so we'd like to bring that in.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
No, I found it very interesting what you said about terminology.
About
terminology.
yes.
And I was wondering, So how do you control, because I suppose these words, which are complicated or can have different meanings, people perhaps if they want to understand them, for example, they want to go on the internet and search for their own information. And I was wondering, how do you control the information people, or how do they inform themselves on those sort of words?
Okay, so just to repeat the question for the video as well. Thank you. The question was along the lines of terminology. People now have a lot of access to the internet and things, so how do you keep it consistent and clashes with things that are coming in from external?
That's a good question. And we're always working on it. We're always trying to discipline ourselves. We try to keep it going among the people who are in the building, and we get new people and try to train them as well. It's like rolling the rock up the hill. You just have to keep moving it forward and disciplining yourselves to get the right words. And so we don't always use the right words, nor do we all use consistent messages. But we try very hard, and we talk about them, we write them down, we share them. We share them not only internally, but also with our partners in other agencies, and many of whom are in the room here. So we try to, we're just always working on it. And sometimes we need to upgrade them as well. So it's working on messages, working on terminology. It seems to be a never-ending issue. You're always training, you're always talking about it, and it just keeps on going.
So along that line, Cassandra, you're critical here because you're the conduit between what we say and the jargon we use and what the actual public understands. Did you have to go through training, or how do you pick up these terminologies?
All of our training is on the job. So we are learning things as they happen, which makes everybody on your side of the equation essential to us. I would advise maybe in that situation with terminology, everyone's using social media a whole lot more. So I would say definitely get the right terminology out there on social media. That will help to, journalists will be looking there. We are happy to spread good information, and that can help you to sort of combat some of the bad information that may be floating around. And a lot of these, like getting flooded with phone calls, stories, make perfect sense. And I think it's important for you all to know essentially what a journalist's job looks like, because we are tasked with finding all this information as fast as possible. We have a bunch of deadlines to meet. A lot of times we're expected to turn ourselves into experts within like a day. And so we're desperately looking for the people who can help us do that. And so having at least a person who can be the point of contact, like you said, you set someone up to sort of field all of the media requests. Just someone to answer the phone, because when we make the phone calls and like no one's answering, that's a nightmare scenario for me, and it makes me feel like I might actually lose my job. So I'm thinking, who else can I call? Who else can I call? Roaming the halls to look for the right scientists? Yes. Like that is where I go if no one's picking up their phone. So thinking about what it looks like from that perspective may help you at least to set up the point people who can be there to answer the phone. Even if the answers are sort of thin, and you can say, well, we don't know this, or we can get back to you on that, that's better than nothing. That's better than the phone just ringing and ringing. I was going to point out, one of the worst case scenarios that I've lived through was I lived in Astoria, and there was a big storm in 2007, and the power was out for like 5 days straight to the whole town. Trees had fallen over the two main highways that lead into town that would, ordinarily deliver supplies like gasoline or groceries. And so, day 3 of this event, you go to the grocery store and the shelves were empty. There were people like with their gas cans lined up at the gas stations because the pumps weren't working properly, so they were like physically pumping gas out of the tanks. It was pretty scary, and the people who were managing the situation were clamping down on information. They were telling the media, listen, like we get updates from our emergency operations center every 6 hours, so you need to wait for the next update. And that might be 4 hours away. So then I'm sitting there with no information. All of the experts are locked in a room with information that they won't tell me. And that is pretty much the worst situation I've been in as a reporter, because it leads you to like, all right, who's not in that room who might know something? You do start to get a little bit desperate to just find some information, which probably means, you go to the grocery store and start talking to people who are, going without food, which then, you end up telling stories that scare people more than if you were able to get information that inform people.
That's a really good point. There's a question here, but I'm keen that we also hear from Frozen at some point.
It's actually for you, Cassandra. How to avoid getting misunderstood by the journalists between what I say as a scientist and what this person that is not a scientist but has to become like an expert in a day or something, between what I say and what this person understands and what he or she writes in the journal. Then what have happened to me is that I try to explain very clearly what are the terminologies and how are all the processes. And then when I read the journal, it's something completely different written. And so how to be maybe more clear, or how to avoid this kind of misunderstood that can put us like in a bad way.
Yeah, definitely. What my best advice would be to maybe try to anticipate where things could go wrong. If you can put yourself in sort of a layperson's shoes and think about, like what is the story that this journalist might be interested in, and how might this information be misinterpreted, maybe based on your past experiences. I think journalists have a tendency to sensationalize information to make their stories more interesting. And so if you can maybe play that out in your head, think about, all right, so what might they do to turn this into a story that's not true? And just face that head on with the person you're talking to. Be like, listen, this is not what I'm talking about. This is not the story. I want to be very clear about that. Because if a journalist hears that, they're going to take that very seriously. And ultimately, we don't want to tell stories that aren't true. But we do want to tell stories that people will read, that are interesting to people, that will deliver important information to people, not stories that are going to make people's eyes glaze over and have them click on something else like BuzzFeed.
I would just add that we provide feedback to the journalists. It's a working partnership. And they have a very tough job to do, and they have a very limited time to do deadlines. So we very much focus on messages that are very clear and that can be easily understood. And then we have regular meetings with them, and I do a lot of work on large fires. And so we provide feedback. And something like the fact that we're getting a lot of calls, that there are elderly people who are afraid in their homes because they're afraid of what's going to happen. It's important feedback for them because they don't want to be scaring people. And so you need to be feeding back what's happening and working with them so they get their deadline met, but it's providing adequate information to the community.
Thank you. Okay, good.
Yeah, just a couple suggestions for early career scientists, whether that's this group. I work at the Alaska Volcano Observatory.
Hang on, sorry, I'm going to ask you to speak into the microphone for the video.
You should not need a microphone. I work at the Alaska Volcano Observatory. I've been doing that for about 20 years. We deal a lot with the media. A couple of just suggestions. I think the thing that understanding the media as a tough job is very important, and trying to give them the information very clearly. There has been times when I have gotten off message and not corrected it, and then that can propagate. So what I've learned is that if you start going down the field, you're going down and you're explaining something, just keep talking and saying, if you get to a point where you're like, oh crap, I'm talking myself into a corner here, just keep talking, because then they can't cut that part out and make that the soundbite, because that has happened to me. And so I'm starting to say something that's really inflammatory. I'm saying, oh, I really don't want to use this, and make that part of the clip, and don't just end there and say, boy, I should have said that. Because sometimes the person that interviews you is not the person who produces the story. And they lose the context of the fact that you frowned afterwards and said, yikes, I really didn't want it to go that way. Another point is that talking points for organizations that are agreed on, amongst university folks. Freistine, and your work at IMO, or with your work with IMO, with the university, I mean, that's very key to making sure that people are on the same page. And so we come up with talking points that are consistent amongst all the people responding. But I think the really interesting thing is we have a really different perspective here. We have Patty from Ecuador, you have people from the U.S., and then Freistine hasn't had a chance to talk yet. But the media are really different in those countries, right? I mean, I think in Iceland, people live on the volcano. They get the idea of volcanoes. The U.S., I think, we're driven by the next news cycle and how quickly. And I don't have much experience in Ecuador, Patty, but I know that you do. And maybe the journalism side is different there. And I think it's really important, since this is an international group, to understand how those regional differences matter. So maybe that's something you guys want to discuss. I don't know.
Lovely, thank you. Our sixth panel member there, David. That was thank you. Right, Bryson, definitely, we want to hear from you. I think there's lots of points that's been raised. Something that I was thinking was around the terminology. You obviously have the issue of tourists. Well, everyone has the issue of tourists coming in. But in Iceland, not many people speak Icelandic. So how do you deal with the terminology between all the different, with the tourists, basically, and also an experience of bad crisis, please? And any other comments?
I think we have maybe not anything really bad to report from Iceland, but I can think of improvements on the way. First, this issue of communication during crisis. There is one point that was brought up, that is really to prevent a group of people, of scientists, from communicating. There's a lot of demand, but we are supposed to be doing our work, evaluate our data, and try to draw conclusions on what is going on inside the Earth. And for that, people need, they need to hide away from the communication with me. That's really important. I think in general, if I can think of something that is bad, it's about when there is more than one sort of interpretation, or there are very conflicting views on a situation that is a classical thing, that people give different advice or different evaluation of what will happen in the future. And we find in Iceland that this is what the media really picks up on this, because then they can have more news, they can start to talk to more people and say, get some conflict and get some interest, and people listen to this kind of news. And the way forward there is, of course, the idea to discuss with your colleagues before you discuss with the media. One way or the other. I mentioned these meetings of a scientific committee of persons involved, really important. They mentioned talking points. I mean, we, at the end of these meetings, the first thing we try to finish at this meeting is really a report from the scientific committee that goes out. These are really then our talking points, and we talk around them. So that is all very important regarding terminology. That it is a really good point. Iceland has changed with lots of tourists now, so the issue of communicating with tourists is a big deal. We almost have a double system already, so that it is Icelandic and English, so everything goes out in English from the civil protection, from the very first information goes out in English. So that is important. I think just be very clear what you say. Think before you speak, and be clear. For early scientists, you will end up in different positions. Some go to monitoring agencies, some continue in academic, private companies. Just be ready to speak, be honest, be very clear. Think of what is the message you can bring in, and just like common sense, if you don't know about the volcano or what is going on, then you can also point to some others to do the talking.
Okay, we've got a question here. I'm going to walk around with my microphone. So
Thanks, Susan. I'd actually like to do a bit of Dave, if that's okay. So my name is Andrew Tucker. I manage the National Operations Centre for the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. I just want to make a couple of quick points. Firstly, everything that's been said by this fine panel applies right across all natural hazards. These are very strong universal lessons. In fact, we ourselves have learned quite a lot from watching the volcanological experience. I've circled the documents on IAVCEI crisis management, or management of crisis during eruptions. Someone can tell me the exact title, but that's fantastic work. We've been able to draw that into our own operational work with cyclone, tsunami, and so on. The points about unity, thank you, as prepared earlier. Points about unity during the crisis, the relationship with government, the ability for government to have confidence to let the authoritative scientific organisations speak directly to the media, the trust in the media, understanding that media are not fake news, are not the enemy, but the media really appreciate a trustful relationship. It's all very important. But I just wanted to add one other thing that the panel might or might not like to comment on, which is during a crisis, if you're involved at all in crisis response and in determining the advice given to the public or to emergency services, keep a log in real time of discussions had and decisions made, because during or after the crisis there could or will be an inquiry called at any stage. The terms of reference of that inquiry will be determined by the levels of trust amongst the players, and the way that inquiry plays out and disrupts your professional life afterwards will be determined to a large extent by the information that you're able to provide the next day onto the desk of the governor or whoever is asking for it. Thanks for your forbearance.
Okay, so there was a point at the end that someone might want to comment from the panel about keeping a log. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, before we get on to that.
Well, you say that the relationship between the different colleagues from the management, scientists, the observatory were really important. So, and you said also practice, exercising, simulating this kind of eruption just to have better and better response of all of the colleagues would be really important. So could you tell me the different, how you practice, how you train, how frequent you do this kind of exercise, and if you can see that there is really good progress and just, how it happened.
Okay, does anybody specifically want to address that?
From my experience, the most important thing and the value of an emergency response plan is the relationships that are established when it's formed. It's just like curriculum in schools. The teachers that develop the curriculum are the ones that are really interested in using it. Other teachers, not so much. So the challenge is that people are turning over, people are leaving, new people are arriving. So you need to periodically refresh the process of the response plan and to actually have tabletop exercises where you rehearse it, because that brings the new players in, and the relationships that are formed in updating the response plan and practicing are what see you through when you have the crisis.
Okay, let's jump.
So, question.
I think Patty wanted to comment as well, maybe?
We also do the monitoring of all the seismic activity in Ecuador. So we have a lot of seismic events, at least one every 6 weeks to 2 months. That's at least a 5 or above that's felt. So there is a lot of the press, the written, and the televisions that come to our office. So basically we know most of it. And they become used to our terminology, which is a good thing. And often one of us will be assigned or maybe just chose to go and sit with the person and talk at length, maybe 5 or 10 minutes off the camera, to be able to explain a little bit more. That's not so much like a round table where you get everybody together, but it's to talk about that particular timing. So it does help to spend that individual time in investment, as I put it, in creating these relationships, because the better they write about what they're trying to get across, it also then comes back and helps us in terms of sounding like we know what we're doing and having better credibility with the population and the authorities. So I like to spend, more than just talking right then in front of the camera, if it's possible. I like to, myself or another senior person, be able to talk a little bit more at length off the camera with the press.
Okay, thank you. I've got 15 minutes left of time. But, there's also a question. Would you like to make a comment?
Just a quick question perhaps around the term of, or the theme of liability. I mean, a few years ago we had the Aquila earthquake. So I don't want to get into details here, obviously, but in New Zealand, basically, in any observatories, we get all questions turning around the themes of forecasting. What is going to happen next? What do we think will be happening next, etc.? What will be the impact on people? So, in some cases, because also this liability is growing, we tend to be, at times, perhaps a little bit cautious about how we're going to be proposing our message, and essentially we're going to be offering scenarios. One may be, the most likely scenario may be this, but an eruption could happen at any time, which you could argue is bloody useless in terms of information, really, quite frankly. Right. So maybe a question to the panel from your experience is, how much has the Aquila changed your communication strategy?
Great question, yeah, really thankful. Start with you first.
In our case in Iceland, I think it has sharpened it a little bit, but it was always in the form that the important sort of or difficult messages, they were at the responsibility of the civil protection. So we have this dialogue between scientists with the civil protection coming to a conclusion, and with a single message that goes from civil protection that then forms the talking points that everyone uses. I think that is a very good approach. And for many of the scientists in Iceland, like Ila, I think it hasn't changed anything. I mean, we continue just to reply to questions if we are asked by the media. It's part of the trust, building of trust. I'm not hiding anything. I try to give the information I have on the evaluation. But in terms of reliability, it is really through the civil protection.
I think that what happened in L'Aquila probably encourage us all to do the very best job that we can, maybe to be a little bit more diligent about keeping track of what we're doing and writing things down, working with officials in the most efficient way possible, and also recognizing that whatever happens, there may be lawsuits, there probably will be lawsuits, and that we'll just do the best we can to prepare.
Yeah, I think it's really important that there are consensual talking points that are agreed upon by the senior scientists who will be talking, so that everybody is basically online with the same terminology. So there's lesson. You'll never absolutely have total clarity, but less confusion by the media or by civil defense. I also think that when we deal with a new volcano that's wakening up or a new situation, we often try to come out before the scientists talk, but with a report that's published over the media, over our website, so that the person who's understanding, say, a new volcano, what are the hazards, they're not just getting it from that discussion, but they also then can refer to our website, they can refer to maybe we put out 500,000 notifications to certain individuals, and then also then they have that information to rely upon to do the best job possible. Like you say, I mean, I think that's imbued in all of us, and we do use probabilities that this scenario has a higher probability at this point than other scenarios. We can be wrong, and we also talk about unknowns. That is what could happen, but it may or may not happen. So we do want to talk about uncertainties as well. There's always things that happen that, not always, but that could happen that are out of your time frame, but they do happen.
Okay, thank you. We're coming to panel member number 6 in a second, but along that line, I just wanted to briefly ask Cassandra, with the uncertainty issue and the probability, is it easy to communicate, or do you have trouble with that? It's easier to just say, yes, it will happen a week on Thursday at 3:30, I assume. How does it work?
We are sophisticated enough to understand what we mean by probability. And it doesn't hurt to explain it a couple times. Be like, listen, that doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen. But in general, I would say the media can grasp that. So please share that information and just follow the same principles of doing it carefully and clearly.
That's actually really good to know. So we should all communicate that, right? Come on, everybody, if you want. Briefly, please.
I think the other important thing is for new people to understand the difference between hazards and risk. And so, one way to keep from getting outside of your element is to talk about the things which are the hazards. And that line between hazard and risk is sometimes really gray, and don't let yourself get involved too deeply into the risk side of things if really what you're expert in is hazards.
That's a good point that comes in. Okay, we've got time for probably one more question. There's lots. Sorry, you were the first person.
Kind of along the same vein of what you were talking about before, what do you do, or what do you try to do to protect against losing trust when, say, you've recommended an evacuation and nothing happens?
Who would like to answer that first?
Well, it's not that we recommend it directly to the population, but you may recommend it to the president or the top civil defense authority, based on what is clearly a situation where all the elements that are monitoring volcanoes seem to be increasing, and also seeing the vulnerability of the population that has never had an evacuation. We were involved in basically giving advice to the president, saying that this volcano could very well have an important VEI 3 or 4 eruption, and that he said, well, he didn't want one death, so he had very low acceptability of any vulnerability, and he said the only way is to evacuate the entire population. So it took, and that was done. 23,000 people were evacuated, but they were evacuated for a long period of time. As many said afterwards, had it only been for a week or 5 or 10 days, then they could have handled it. But for various circumstances, and not because of the volcano, they were kept out for a long time. And so they really had a tremendous hate towards us. And it was difficult for me to drive around the town of Banyuls for many years afterwards and feel that the people did not despise me. But the way it worked out is that I continued to work. I continued to be friendly with the people. I continued to have the radio show Lunch with the Volcanologists, to be able to talk at length about what are we seeing, what does it mean, how are you all, recovering here. And I mean, this empathy. You can only have empathy usually when you live near people or when you're involved with them. And so, things turn around after 15 years if you wait long enough. I got the Medal of Honor last year from the town of Banyuls for doing, outstanding work. So I said, wow. From having gone from the person like I was being stabbed, there were pictures of me in the church. There's the main church there, and there were needles in that picture. So I'm saying I was really down in the dumps, but now I got a medal. So I got applause. So it's amazing how time turns around. You have to spend a long time at it, but they also knew that the decision was not mine. In the end, it was the president who made the decisions. But they suffered a lot. So there's really it's trying to create trust again, and people want to trust you if you're there long enough. And that's how it happened.
Okay, brilliant. I'd just like to start to wrap up. One of the things we were keen to sort of ask the panel we'll probably only get time to ask maybe one or two of them, was because we have an early career researcher, this was the focus of this, and you just said, Patty, that you should spend at least 15 years there, and that's when you gain the trust back, which is great. But if you're an international scientist coming in, parachuting in, you need to be able to deal sympathetically and well with the local scientists, the public, the media, etc. So I'm going to ask you for a time. Are there any sort of do's or don'ts for an early career researcher who might be going in to look at the deposits, for example, or something to do with the monitoring? How should they go about it?
Share your science and results. It is so easy to stay isolated. You just come and do your work. You may have an important piece of information about the volcano. I think the challenge for us as a society is really to bring all the new evidence together quickly enough to be evaluated in a crisis situation. That is, for example, in Iceland, when I look back, we had a large European-funded project, Future Work, where one of the aims was to bring together monitoring scientists and researchers so that the early data is on the table, can be evaluated. I think the problems arise when there are individual persons or researchers that have important data that are not shared with others. When there's a crisis, we really all need to work together.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so unfortunately, I know there's lots of questions and it's been fascinating, but we do have to wrap up because of time. I'm just going to blind everyone briefly again. And Andrew very nicely brought up that there are papers out there and guidelines for people about professional conduct during crises, including if you're an international researcher. Most people probably know about these, but we have the paper from 1999, and then there's been an update since Lapalo, which is available on the IAVCEI website. The Global Volcano Model also has principles about how you should work in an international community, both in unrest times and peacetime. These are available on the GVM website, and this is sort of outlined here. I would look it up, but I don't want to blind people. So just in the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes, if everyone on the panel could just give a closing comment on what you think your take-home message would be for the people in the audience, based on what we've heard today, and briefly, please, a minute or so if possible.
Pass it first.
We'll go the other way. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to mention one thing, because it is important that media can, of course, help to inform about our science and make volcanoes interesting. I think we should not forget that most people are really excited about volcanoes, trying to understand it better, make use of that in a positive manner. You can also use that during the peacetime. We didn't discuss much here. That is equally important. That is really the important time to build up trust. So don't start to plan communicating with the media when an eruption happens. Start right now.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think the important thing to remember is, in a crisis situation, the media is going to be dealing with time constraints and access to information. So anything you can do to sort of anticipate those needs and provide the information that you think that people are going to want is, I think, going to make everyone's lives easier.
Being very clear in your messaging, and uncertainty is a message, and there are ways of conveying it in a very professional way, but we don't know what the volcano is going to do. So it's important to have that backdrop, and I also say never, because it's generally when you say something with great certainty, the next day something else happens. So keep in mind that we don't have the ball, we just kind of help move it down the field.
Before a crisis, meet the people, get to know the people that you are going to have to work with during a crisis. And looking around the room, I see at least a half dozen people from state and county emergency management and Geological Survey of Washington, deal with hazards, local county emergency managers, and they are here to learn the culture of volcanology science. And likewise, we go to their happenings to learn about their needs in emergency management. So that's most important. Make sure that people recognize that they are an important part of your communication plan, as Cassandra is. And we've already had Cassandra at CBO to teach us similar things as what you were learning today. So very important to have a two-way with news media as well as other partners.
I think in the end that we all would agree that we are the spokespeople for the volcano. The volcano does have its means of communicating. There's no doubt about it if a column's coming out, but maybe something else is coming up the conduit. Or maybe it's not. So it's really up to us to be able to find the best terminology, the best kind of stance, the body language we use to communicate that. I also think that in the case where I see is that volcano observatories, they need to promote themselves a little better. I'm not talking about here, but maybe where I am, is that we lose opportunities to be able to reach out to the public, to be able to give a general type of a explanation about a certain volcano event or a volcano. And you know, in those instances, people get to know us, the press gets to know us. And there is fake news. There are bad people who want to go out and try to degenerate your work and talk about it. During a crisis, we've had situations where there's a group of people who persistently say this is not correct information. Well, how is the media going to know who to go to unless they work with you, unless they're convinced of you ahead of time? So everything we do to get some good, solid, timely, and friendly information out that's educating, that kids like, that public likes in general, that's good for us. And therefore we'll be on a better ground for when there is a crisis. And we'll be on a better ground to be able to have a better relationship with the press in a big way. Thanks so much.
Perfect, thank you very much. This was fascinating, and unfortunately we've run out of time. I'd firstly like to thank our amazing panel for their contribution. And I'd also like to thank you guys for getting involved and being here. Hopefully it was useful. I think that's everything. Thank you all.
Yeah, we would definitely like to thank Susanna for moderating.
Yes.
Yeah, we need